Good evening. I'm Patricia Van Skyke. I'm Executive Director of the Lloyd Library and Museum, and I'd like to welcome you to tonight's program, The Medicinal Heritage and Ethnohistory of Mustard with Kevin Grace. This lecture is part of our fellowship series. This program's registration with both a remote and live audience tells us that either Mustard and or Kevin is very popular. Yes. As many of you know, the Lloyd Library was founded in the late 1800s by three brothers who conducted research, including collecting books and specimens from around the world for the development and manufacture of nature-based drugs. One of the brothers, Curtis Gates Lloyd, was also an ethnobotanist. My guess is that he would be very impressed in the way that Kevin has been able to continue to merge the fields of medicine, nature, and history. For those of you in the live audience and those zooming in who live in the greater Cincinnati area, you can learn more about Curtis Gates Lloyd's travels and discoveries in our upcoming exhibition, Visions of Nature Across Time and Space. And that opens on September 30th. I hope you'll be able to join us for the opening. Following tonight's presentation, there will be a question and answer session. We ask that the in-person audience hold your questions to the end. Zoom participants, feel free to enter your questions at any time in the chat function. We will take them down and deliver them to Kevin during the question and answer session. One of our 2022 research fellows, Kevin Grace, has had a distinguished career as head of the Archives and Rare Book Department at the University of Cincinnati, a position he retired from around this time last year. For years, he was my go-to guy when I had a hard archives question. And for those of you who may not know this, there are hard archives questions. You can imagine how handy it was to have him sitting in here doing research. Kevin also taught in the University Honors Program with experiential learning for his students, provided study tours around the world. He holds degrees in anthropology from Wright State University and the University of Cincinnati with a focus on culture. You'll immediately see the impact of this influence on tonight's program. His expertise is in rare books and manuscripts and ranges from literary, ethnographic travels and scientific accounts from the 15th to the early 20th centuries to the cross-cultural customs of everyday life. The research that he conducted here at the Lloyd will make its appearance in a digital exhibition, soon to go live on our website. Kevin has more than a dozen books that he has authored, and so it should come as no surprise to you that a work on mushrooms is in the works. And he tells me he hopes to travel to mustard hotspots. Sounds very intriguing. Here at home, I got the inside scoop. Won't surprise you to learn that one particular condiment takes up an awful lot of real estate in the Grace family fridge. It is now my pleasure to introduce the distinguished historian, 2022 Lloyd Fellow, and my good friend, Kevin Grace. We're all good, yeah. And there's.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Talk's not going to be as long as this. It's just that getting older, I need bigger print. So thank you, all of you, for being here this evening, whether it's in person or virtually through Zoom. I really, really appreciate this. I'd also like to thank the board of directors of the Lloyd Library and Museum for awarding me the 2022 fellowship to pursue this passion, as arcane as it might seem to the greater world. But I'd especially like to thank the librarians and archivists here at the Lloyd, Pat Van Skyke, Aaron Campbell, Alex Erline, Christine Jankowski, and Betsy Crudoffer. They're really the best, and my research was greatly advanced by their expertise and their friendliness. And thank you to the scholars who supported my fellowship proposal, Professor John McNay, Professor Anil Menon, and Dr. Don Heinrich Holtzman. And I'd like to thank Barry Levinson, the founder and curator of the National Mustard Museum in Middleton, Wisconsin. There is a National Mustard Museum, well worth a visit. And Luis Rivas of the G.S. Dunn Mustard Corps of Hamilton, Ontario. And my son-in-law, Paul Rogero, and the Wober Mustard Company, which he is a family member and a big part. And finally, my wife, Joan Fenton, who tolerates a dozen or so different mustards in the fridge at any one time. But it's all part of experiential learning. Now to our subject for this evening, the medicinal heritage and ethnohistory of mustard. And the slides are not advanced. So what have I done wrong?
I'm going to interrupt you for a second.
Sure.
Get rid of something that's on the screen here. So. Right.
So will the slide advance now? Nope.
Is this where you want it? Or
Oh, going up?
or you want to go down?
It doesn't matter. There we go. Okay. Our subject for this evening then, and this ethnohistory of mustard, it's really a symbol of small beginnings, of strength, of enthusiasm, of growth and faith. But admittedly, the medicinal heritage aspect is a bulky and bumptious title. So we're going to go with mustardology tonight. A little bit simpler. What I'd like to do this evening is take you through a look at mustard as both an herbal cure and as a condiment, and how these two aspects of the plant have intersected over the centuries down to our current time. There's evidence of mustard being used 3,000 years ago in Egypt and Asia Minor. And as an herbal health treatment, mustard falls into a category of homeopathic medicine. This leads to viewing it in an anthropological sense, that experience determines usage, and rather like the concept of sympathetic magic. That is, if we do this, then that will happen. Sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. So that creates what we call a creed of belief, where if it happens often enough, then we're going to believe that it happens all the time. That's the case with what we see in the early botanists and herbal practitioners of what they thought mustard could do. So we'll see that mustard helps inflammation, but does not cure baldness. And as we shall see, science is discovering more medical properties of mustard all the time. So hope springs eternal. In terms of mustard being a condiment, when we ingest it as such, we're relating it to good health. And of course, as we should see too, in 19th century America, there were those health advocates who maintained that the use of mustard as a condiment would lead to a crisis of health. So as for general background, the Brassica genus of which mustard is classified originated 24 million years ago from India to Northwest Africa. Diverging from that ancestral plant, today the genus includes mustard, of course, but also cabbage, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, turnips, and unfortunately kale. So with this shift in tectonic plates and the creation of land bridges, Brassica spread to every available environment. It extended east, west, north, and south, including Central and Southern Europe. And we should note that every variety of mustard is edible, if only for the young leaves rather than the mature seeds. Treacle mustard and garlic mustard, for example, grow wild, and in many parts of the world, they're considered invasive plants. In Ohio, garlic mustard, brought to the United States about 200 years ago, both for culinary purposes and as a medicinal herb, is the most invasive plant in the state. It's found in every Ohio county and outcompetes native plants, though its negative effects seem to be lessening over time. Nevertheless, it has no natural eaters such as deer, and so the understory of edible plants for animals is overwhelmingly consumed. And a single garlic mustard plant can generate thousands of seeds that are viable in the environment for 7 years. So what I'm showing here are two 18th century engravings, the left and the middle one, and a 19th century engraving at the right. Three of the mustard plants that we actively cultivate in the world: Brassica alba, or white mustard; Brassica nigra, or black mustard; and Brassica juncea, or brown mustard. White mustard is the type used for the ubiquitous yellow mustard we all love. If you've ever wondered why the mustard is yellow, it's because they add turmeric to it, which incidentally is another helpful medicinal plant. Black mustard is the mustard used in Chinese medicine and some Asian and African cuisines, and is the mustard seed referred to in religious writings. It's also used for homeopathic medicines and for cooking oils in South Asia. Brown mustard is what is used for Dijon-style mustards, as well as being combined with yellow mustard for the English-style strong mustards. This 1792 copper plate of black mustard in the middle there, Sinapsis nigra, is really the mustard that you would see used for creating mustard oils, and it's used for homeopathic treatments. And the engraving, incidentally, I'll refer to a lot of these as engravings that I discovered here in the Lloyd when I was doing my research. This one is from Medical Botany, published in Edinburgh in serial form from 1790 to 1794. One of the first accounts I looked at during my research here at the Lloyd was the work of Pedanius Dioscorides, who died in 90 in the Common Era. He was born in Turkey. He was a Greek physician and botanist who was a physician to the Roman army. He wrote a 5-volume treatise on herbal medicine that for over 1,500 years was consulted by other herbalists and physicians. He's one of the earliest physicians to make a written record of mustard's uses, and believed in the use of mustard in plasters and poultices for healing, and stated that such a use would aid pregnancy and childbirth. Here's something of what he wrote. It alleviates headache, and the pituitary is discharged against very tough tumors of the tonsils and chronic callous arteries. It aids epilepsy. For lethargy, shave the head and smear it with figs and mustard until it becomes red. Smear with vinegar against a dry fever. What he's revealing here is that very early on, mustard was an element that could be combined with other things to relieve pain. And while his belief about its efficacy was quite extended, he did understand that the, quote, heat nature of mustard soothes body pains. Now, as I said, Dioscorides' work was consulted in Western medicine for 1,500 years. Another early physician who advocated the use of mustard was the Italian Pietro Mattioli, who lived from 1501 to 1577, an influential physician and botanist who, by the way, first identified the medical condition of being allergic to cats. So those of you who out there who have that an affliction, science has been working on it for over 5 centuries. We'll get there. But just look at that face that he has there. Does it surprise you that he experimented with poisonous plants on prisoners or viciously attacked any scientist who had the audacity to disagree with it? But Mattioli also loved mustard. He studied and sketched the varieties of the plant and promoted mustard's beneficial health effects. He said it prevents us from giving up, which I think is a wonderful thing for mustard. It's a great way of summing up why we should eat a lot of mustard. Now, this next person, Flemish botanist Rembert Doedens from the 16th century, saw that mustard as eaten or as a plaster stimulates the appetite and treats dropsy, deafness, poor eyesight. It aids urination and menses, agues, phlegm, sciatica, lethargy. It rids you of freckles and spots, falling sickness, short-windedness, humming in the ears, and many more. He had 28 medical uses for all mustard, including this. This is a quote from him. The perfume or savor thereof driveth away all venoms and venomous beasts. And in that time, that probably included dragons as well. Oops, I'm down here. There we go. There's his other drawing of mustard. This is Robert Lovell's 1659 herbal. It's amazing that some of his claims for mustard still have scientific validity. On the other hand, he says that if you take frequent low dosages for immunity, it will helpeth you against knaves, Grecians, and clowns. He says it also helpeth those that have lost their hair. It does not. This 1718 Amsterdam illustration of Asian mustard that you see on the right there is also called Mediterranean, African, or Saharan mustard, native to the Mediterranean basin and in the Levant. The illustrator for this was a French botanist by the name of Claude Aubriot in the 1651-1742, and it was in the posthumous publication of French botanist Joseph Biton de Tournefort, the man you see on the left there. The two of them traveled to Greece and Constantinople, the Black Sea, and other countries in the area. But it's mainly in their feeling that it was the plant's leaves that are eaten with lemon and oil juice. I mean, oil and lemon juice, but the seeds are edible as well. This is the plant that is now invasive in North America. Interestingly, Tournefort was also the one who coined the term herbarium during his work in the 17th century. Now, this is English physician Thomas Sydenham, living from 1624 to 1689. Sydenham's medical treatise was a primary text for more than 2 centuries. So we can see that a lot of these early herbalists and physicians had a very lasting influence on the development of science as the centuries went on. He said of mustard, "But for the advantage of beginners, I will set down the remedy I am wont to use." That is, he used it for treating gout, heart failure, cramps, worms, rashes, and spasmodic cough. So you see, it's a wonder drug in many ways. One of the most beautiful herbals in that classic age botanic illustration is the massive elephant folio of 18th century physician Timothy Sheldrake, a native of Norwich in England, which happens to be the 19th century location for some of the finest mustard fields in Great Britain. In the mid-1700s, Sheldrake published on the causes of climate heat and cold and greenhouse gardening. Early on, he saw that climate warming was changing the way mustard plants in Northern Europe, and that greenhouse gardening could alleviate that. This is his book, Botanicum Medicinale, an herbal and medicinal plants on the College of Physicians list that was published in 1759. The copper plates were engraved by C.H. Hemrick and are noted for, they really have a very simple grace to them. They're contained in oval framing, as we see here. The mustard plants are surrounded by Sheldrake's botanical information about the plant and its uses for medicine. Here he does treacle medicine, which again is considered an invasive plant these days. Nicholas Culpeper's Complete Herbal, this is the 1787 edition out of Manchester in England, was another widely used herbal that determined how physicians would treat their patients. It was noted not only for its simple, elegant woodcuts of the mustard plant, but of its detailed physical description as well as its virtues or uses. Excuse me. He says the seeds are used, and of them is made the sauce of common use, which is a wholesome condiment, provoking an appetite, strengthening the stomach, and helping digestion. It's also good for the head and useful for apoplexies, lethargy, and palsy, especially of the tongue. The seed, when it's bruised and infused in wine or ale, is of great service against the dropsy and scurvy, provoking urine in the menses, and outwardly applied is very drawing and ripening, and laid on paralytic members, it recalls the natural heat. It's interesting that he says it's effective against scurvy because it turned out that it was. In the 18th century, when British ships started sailing the seas and establishing claims here, the seamen often fell victim to scurvy. And it was determined that if they took mustard on board and used that, that would help in a great way. And it turns out that it did. Treacle mustard, he said, would do many of the same things as white mustard, but also help gout and sciatica. this comes to one of my favorites now. The Herbal of Elizabeth Blackwell. Elizabeth Blackwell was a Scottish illustrator, lived from 1707. Did I do something to make it awfully light? Oh, we're going to take a break here for just a second. Let me tell you about Elizabeth Blackwell while we're waiting for the images. She published her book, A Curious Herbal, from 1737 to 1739. I think I probably hit a wrong button.
It's okay.
There are so many.
It's all right.
There we go.
Bingo.
Wow.
Okay. She used the botanical specimens in the Chelsea Physic Garden in London, and she compiled her herbal for the use of pharmacists and physicians. For mustard plants, she illustrated white mustard, hedge mustard, and treacle mustard for the herbal. She came about her profession of botanical illustrator out of necessity. Elizabeth Blackwell married her cousin, Alexander Blackwell, who was a physician. Well, now we got.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
There you go.
Are we back on?
Yep, you're very good. All right.
That's all right. She married her cousin, Alexander Blackwell, a physician, but not a very successful one. After failing as a physician and failing in publishing, Alexander found himself in debtor's prison. So in order to survive, Elizabeth had to find an income. And learning that there was a need for an herbal, she set to work illustrating the plants, and Alexander was to provide the scientific annotations and descriptions. This is her illustration and then her description of the uses of white mustard. She was an amateur at this, but so involved in it, so willing to learn, so willing to have her work critiqued by others, that it really cultivated a lot of favor. And the 500 engravings that she did for her herbal are really extraordinary for their beauty and their usefulness to physicians. She received a commendation from the Royal College of Physicians and earned enough money to release her husband from prison. Wasn't good enough, though. There was more bad fortune and death that followed them. Alexander just couldn't really get it going. He had other failures, and then he left the family to work in Sweden in farm management. Somehow he got involved in some sort of ne'er-do-well shenanigans to the point where he was convicted of planning to kill the crown prince. He was sentenced to be decapitated and figured he could at least go to his execution in good humor. He joked to the executioner that it was his first beheading, so he needed assistance on how to lay his head on the block. The axe came down on August 9, 1747. Now, many of us are familiar with the Christian biblical parable, the mustard seed. Similar parables also appear in other faiths. In the late 17th and the 18th centuries, scientists attempted to accommodate religious belief with a rush of scientific discovery. That is what they were calling natural theology. One such individual was a Swiss paleontologist, Johann Schucher, who began his scientific career training as a physician. Now, I hope you can see this. If you look at the frontispiece to the left, you will see a tall plant growing. This is the mustard tree. And mustard is not actually a tree and does not grow that high, except, if you believe it will. In his book, Physica Sacra, he used a biblical point of reference to describe the natural world and its processes. His was an attempt to reconcile science with the religious belief system. So in this frontispiece, he shows an example of the mustard parable, the tiny seed of faith that grows into a mighty tree. There are 4 mentions of the mustard seed in the New Testament Gospels, 2 from Matthew, 1 from Mark, and 1 from Luke. That all these deal with faith and with the kingdom of heaven. But interestingly, mustard seed parables are also found twice in the Quran in terms of accepting Allah and entering the kingdom of heaven, and in Buddhism with the parable of a woman undergoing a futile gathering the mustard seeds as a task put out for her from Siddhartha Gautama. And she went to her neighbors trying to gather mustard seeds from them. They had none, found they had all been touched by death. So it was a way for the Buddha to show her as a grieving mother to accept the death of her beloved son. We go to, back here, the Lloyd's copy of botanist Samuel Thompson's 1835 Boston Remedy book, where he says, but mustard is good to create an appetite and assist the digestion. He also said that it helped treat rheumatism inside and out, which in fact it does. At the time before him, we even had Cotton Mather, the New England theologian, who published a medical book extolling the use of mustard as well. Now, here's where we get to things where mustard is maybe not the thing we want in life. This is Robert Burton, lived from 1577 to 1640, who wrote The Anatomy of Melancholy in 1621. And for the next 2 centuries, it was read by physicians, philosophers, and depressed poets. Burton contended that if you use mustard, it sends gross fumes to the brain and caused men to go mad. But then we get to mid-19th century America, and it really gets interesting. There developed other health advocates who believed the use of mustard was detrimental to well-being. Sylvester Graham, for instance, of the Graham cracker, published his lectures in which he said that mustard was highly exciting and exhausting. This is a bad thing in his view. And when used habitually, was seriously mischievous. Mustard leads to insanity. At the same time, a Mrs. M.L. Shaw, who was another natural diet advocate, said that mustard was pernicious. Of course, Graham was talking about sexual appetites. In his view, ketchup also led to insanity, but we're going to leave that to the ketchup bashers. Graham was joined in this thinking by John Kellogg, cornflakes. Both men were against the use of condiments, believing they added nothing to nutrition, and we now know that they're wrong. Turmeric and mustard are good examples. They believed spicy food was sexually stimulating, which they weren't in favor of. And instead, they promoted dietary reform that focused on a naturally bland diet. Graham was also a fervent believer in phrenology. Unfortunately, in his diagram of a head here, he didn't identify the exact skull bump that indicates the depravity and sanity of the mustard eater. So we'll continue to wander the earth unrecognized. By the last decades of the 1800s, we were well into the age of the mustard plaster, either made with home remedies, as it had been for centuries, at least dating back to Dioscorides, or commercially produced by pharmacists and mustard or spice merchants. Their general use lasted until the 1950s, though there's currently a revival of their use in homeopathy. But think of them as the ancestors of Vicks Vapor Rub. Mustard as a home remedy in the 19th and early 20th centuries was something bottled and distributed by pharmacists. As an example, just across the river from Cincinnati in Covington was the pharmacy of Edward Pike, who lived from 1859 to 1928. Pike opened his business in 1878 when he was just 18, and he was the youngest licensed pharmacist in Kentucky. He sold various homeopathic medicines in bottles with labels such as this in order for people to make mustard plasters at home. His store at 6th and Main, you might know it now as the De Felice Jazz Club and Restaurant. Now, in this photo at the right there, that's John Uri Lloyd. And it was Christine Jankowski here at the Lloyd who discovered a couple of interesting items when she was researching the uses of wolfsbane or aconite for a patron, and discovered an aconite label from the Lloyd Brothers pharmacist. It states that mustard as a poison antidote by using it as an emetic. In other words, you take enough mustard, throw up, you're cured. But one of the problems pharmacists encountered was adulteration. And just as adulteration was a problem in most food and health products at the time. Lloyd, as Christine found, researched this issue and published it in the American Journal of Pharmacy in 1895 and again in 1898. He examined commercially processed mustard powder provided to pharmacists and found evidence of starch, weed seeds, and wheat grains. So he developed methods and standards to determine the purity of mustard. Now, as I said, one of the traditional medicinal uses of mustard was the mustard plaster used to relieve congestion and muscle aches. But misapplied or left on the skin for too long, the mustard plaster could create a serious burn. In this light, vapor rub is certainly more comforting, though both the plaster and the vapor rub open up the sinuses. This is an early 1900 stereo view card that takes kind of an offbeat look at mustard plaster application. The other way they used mustard was as a mustard bath. This is a 20th century print by Leon Oldman of Paris, who specialized in creating advertising art for the pharmaceutical industry. And this is his work for a mustard foot bath. Now, this is a bit of mustard homeopathy. This 1930s pamphlet by Coleman's Mustard of England, and they also had an American outlet in New Jersey, extols the medical benefits of mustard plasters, mustard baths, and other home remedies. But always promoting Coleman's, the pamphlet also states that it is only in soils having peculiar natural properties that mustard of the highest medicinal value can be produced. What they were referring to was Coleman's own mustard fields back in Lincolnshire, England. This other image is of a nice historical product from Cincinnati. In 1907, Albert Mihaljevic founded the American Products Company as a direct marketer of home products. It was similar to Avon, Fuller Brush, for those of you who remember Fuller Brush, and W.T. Rawley. The firm used this mysterious Zanol trademark, which was formerly a soap product in 1903. Albert brought his brothers Edgar and Clarence into the company, and the company survived until 1948. When I was doing this research, I put out a Facebook call for anybody first who remembered mustard plasters and things like that, but who would know anything about this product. Well, right away, I got a call from a guy just a few streets away from me who said he had this jar and he brought it by the house, and it still has the stuff in it. Yeah. It's sort of a gel application and used for muscle relief, congestion, and general aches and pains. But now we get to more mustard as a culinary item. Now, in that sense, we can trace its modern usage to the Romans. Actually, the word mustard comes from the Latin mustum, which means unfermented grape juice, and it was combined with mustard to make a sauce. The first recipes we have date from 200 Common Era, and then its use then spread upward into Europe through Roman Burgundy. France began mustard cultivation as long ago as the 8th century, spreading it from there to Germany, England, where it was introduced in the 12th century, and then Spain. In France, the mustard plant was often used as ground cover for grapevines in order to return needed nutrients to the soil. And so we're led to a few of the characters of mustard history. On the left is a papal souvenir card of Clement VI, who was the Pope from 1291 to 1352, and one of the so-called Avignon popes. If there was such a designation, he could be considered, I guess, the patron saint of mustard. Clement was born in France's Limousin region and was quite fond of what he called moutarde violette of his youth. When he longed for that taste, the Pope rounded up a Monsieur Jaberdi, who made the purple mustard for Clement, created with red grape must. Jaberdi thus earned the Pope's titling him the Grand Mustard Maker. Almost lost for over 200 years, this mustard was recreated in the 1950s with black grape must, and it is still sold today by the Denoy Distillery. Traditionally, it's eaten with blood sausage. It sounds good to me. There is a sort of a companion to this kind of mustard the Northern Italian condiment called mostarda, which is a fruit-based mustard, which is really good, John, with cheese and crackers. Gotta try it. So anyway, Clement's story may be apocryphal, but there's another. The image on the right is Pope John the 22nd, who served the papacy from 1316 to his death in 1334. He was another Avignon Pope when the Holy See was located in France rather than in Rome. This Pope apparently enjoyed his condiments as well as enfranchising his relatives. So he appointed a nephew who had a reputation for being dim and vain to be the mustard maker to the Pope, or Grand Mustardier du Pape. Supposedly the nephew came from Dijon, and the rest is also supposedly history. Not surprisingly, the Vatican archives is really silent on the subject of mustard. It's still a pretty good story. Francis Charles VI, who was also Charles the Mad, as we will see, reigned from 1380 to 1422 and really loved his mustard. He ate it every day, and during one of his wars against the English, he found himself besieged in Saint-Manchou. A townsman made a dish for him of grilled chicken served with a mustard sauce, and from then on it was his favorite meal. In 1383, Charles VI called upon the Duke Philip to send his soldiers, or mustardiers, from Dijon to use his coat of arms on their product. And as we can see here, with Louis XI, also believed in mustard and carried his mustard pot wherever he went, so that if he had to stop for a meal, he always had his condiment with him. Now, this is a 1657 engraving of Meaux, France, engraved by Matthias Marian and printed in Frankfurt. So how does Meaux relate to mustard heritage? In 771 AD, Charlemagne decreed that the monasteries in the area would use their limestone millstones to grind mustard seeds and use the flour for poultices and cuisine. So they did, and today Meaux is famous for what you might see on the shelves called Pommery mustard. Still the same tradition. In this 1878 French engraving, workers are making mustard at the Lomia Frere factory in Bordeaux. And this was a traditional mustard vendor. In the 1950s, early 1960s, when this image was done, the Belgian National Organization to Fight Tuberculosis commissioned artist James 3R to create a series of postcards depicting that traditional costumes and dress of the early 19th century. So this is one of a mustard vendor that he did. And this is, again, some of Dijon's famous mustards, Parisot factory workers filling mustard containers in Dijon around 1910. This, of course, was Grey Poupon. Two guys, Grey and Poupon. And it wasn't that many years ago when you could pull up next to somebody at a traffic light and ask them if they had any mustard. I love these old French postcards too to promote mustards. And that the one on the right of the gentleman is from a series called Les Épices, and this is La Moutarde. Now, when we get to England and all this is a 19th century Aqua London mustard powder bottle. It's about 5.5 inches tall and would originally been stoppered with a cork. The English mustard crop was especially promoted by Coleman's mustard, as you can see here. And then when we got into advertising in the 19th century, all of a sudden mustard companies are joining everybody else and promoting in America and in Europe, promoting their mustard products, such as this from the Joseph Farrell Company, which originally produced canned peas and decided they would get into mustard as well. When it was founded in Cambridgeshire in 1840, ketchup was their main product, but they began making mustard in 1888 and grew mustard on its own farms in England. Coleman's bought Farrell's in 1912 and established it as a subsidiary company. And then Farrow's was finally discontinued in 1931. As you can see too, even American companies did not just produce mustard, but they produced everything else that was pickled or fermented or anything like that. Culver's Mustard of Philadelphia, and these are little ad cards. Goldens, don't believe what you read about them. They weren't the first to introduce yellow mustard, but they were the first to really promote themselves as doing that. Now, part of our pop culture is incorporation of mustard through music. English composer Cecil Macklin's 1911 one-step, Too Much Mustard, is shown here with the sheet music cover. Now, you can hear this recording on YouTube. It's a scene from a film with Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire, and they do a nice little dance to Too Much Mustard. Few years after that, in 1914, this is Troy Moutard was 1911, but in 1914, a composer over in Covington by the name of Louis Mentel wrote More Mustard, which was another one-step and was patterned after Macklin's. Mentel also composed several ragtimes and tangos and ran his own music publishing company in Cincinnati. His father, John Henry Mentel, was a Covington lithographer and printer, so he did the artwork for his son's sheet music in the same style as Macklin. And if you're really inclined to the dance floor, there's even a polka called Mustard on My Mustache, which is fairly recent. It was recorded in 1980 by the Harry Faint Review. Now, when we get out of Europe and begin to explore more of mustard around the world, we of course look at how England extended its empire in the 1700s and 1800s, because we get to see more and more travel accounts being published that had ethnological information about the South Asian cultures. And granted that all of this was to support the economic and military interests of the British Empire, but we really began to get a better picture of medicine and culinary heritages of India, Nepal, and other countries. In Nepal, the heritage of slash and burn agriculture and terraced farming was written about, as well as religious use of mustard in infant birth rituals, rubbing the newborn's skin as a religious rite, but also having the medicinal effects of warming the infant. We also began learning more of Ayurveda medicine, the traditional Indian healing system, and mustard's association with yoga, massage, and wellness. We're talking about mustard oil here rather than mustard seeds in a culinary sense. Ayurveda, this natural system of holistic medicine, is now undergoing somewhat of a revival in the modern world as we learn more about non-traditional and non-Western health practices. It was created more than 3,000 years ago, and its Sanskrit name means knowledge of life. So essentially, it was concerned with mind, body, and spirit. And while there are many claims in Ayurveda medicine regarding the benefits of mustard oil, more research is needed, but there are indications that the oil improves liver function, may assist in fighting cancer, aids in the fight against heart disease, and is an immunity booster. Because mustard contains calcium, protein, zinc, vitamins A, C, and E, and the oil has a high smoking point of 482 degrees Fahrenheit, so the nutrients remain intact in it. The World Health Organization says mustard has a 5:4 ratio of omega-6 fats to omega-3, so it makes it almost perfect. As you see in this image of mustard oil off the shelves of Jungle Gyms, the rest of the label on the back states that it is for religious purpose and recommended for external use only. So you can also see where a mustard sauce has been created as well for Indian cuisine. Now, while commonly used in cuisine in other parts of the world, internal use of mustard oil is a little late in coming to America, and there's still quite a bit of trepidation about using it. Mustard baths, though, are still considered a healthy way to soothe aching muscles and lift the spirits. This is on our bathroom shelf. One anecdote that shows an American take on mustard oil from over a century ago, just to tell you how dangerous people thought it. On April 6, 1900, boxer Tommy West was meeting his opponent, Jack Bonner, for a heavyweight match at the Broadway Athletic Club in New York City. The bout didn't last more than a few rounds because during the breaks, Bonner's handler smeared his gloves with mustard oil. I'll get to it here. Let me set this down. The fumes blinded West to the point where he couldn't see Bonner, and the referee, Johnny White, suffered from the mustard as well. So he declared a TKO for West. But later that year in November, the two of them met again in Philadelphia without mustard oil, and West beat the bejesus out of Bonner. Modern day Tewksbury mustard, immortalized in Henry IV, Part 2, when Falstaff says of Ned Poins, his wit's as thick as Tewksbury mustard, was very popular in the 17th century. And today the mustard is sold as prepared varieties, along with the mustard ball that Shakespeare would have recognized, and pickled mustard seed, which is also the poor man's caviar. I bring up this piece of English heritage because we now see a change in the crown's mustard of choice in England. With the death of Queen Elizabeth, all the royal warrants for favored products and services are now invalid. In 1964, Her Majesty conferred a royal warrant on Coleman's mustard, as you see here. But now it is possible that King Charles might prefer another brand. So the official mustard, which you will see in television ads and tele ads or billboards, could be something like Tewksbury getting the designation as the royal warrant, but the official mustard for the king. Kind of like Blake Mason is the official attorney for the Bengals or something like that. And just a bit of Cincinnati mustard history. Jocko prepared mustard out of Cincinnati from Newton Products, came as a bank, which many other companies did as well. So when you were finished with the mustard, a kid could have a lid with a slot in it to save some coins. On the right there, you see Mr. Mustard, two little 3-ounce jars that was created in 1939 by Cincinnati's Frank Tea and Spice Company, which was founded in 1896. Mr. Mustard was sold to Durkee's in 1980, and then to a company called House of Herbs. In 2008, it was sold to Wober's Mustard up in Springfield, Ohio, and it's still one of that company's major brands. But whichever mustard you enjoy, the selections are a bit overwhelming. This is just what my phone would take a picture of in terms of the crowd there. But just as we have with beer and spirits now in America, more and more craft mustards are being created all the time. This goes along with the general surge in new sauces. The global condiment industry around the world is $181 billion a year. But it's difficult to say where the mustard industry itself is headed. Most of the world's mustard is supplied by Canada, with India, Nepal, Myanmar, Ukraine, Russia, and the United States, primarily North Dakota and Montana, being large producers as well. Canada produces 80% of the world's brown mustard seed. England and France still grow mustard to supply their traditional mustards, but some of you may have heard of the current Dijon mustard crisis in France, where the import of mustard seed has been seriously short. This is due in large measure to a poor harvest in Canada in 2021, when a heat dome settled over the fields and led to a very dry summer. Harvests went from 135,000 tons in 2020 to 99,000 tons in 2021. 2022 will probably see a low of 71,000 tons. And Ukraine's crop, of course, has been compromised by the Russian invasion. What we are seeing, though, is an increased French interest in increasing their own mustard acreage to satisfy their requirements and the EU's requirements. And Canada is expanding from 300,000 acres under mustard cultivation to 400,000. Interestingly, too, we're also seeing an increase in Nepal's cultivation. The area of mustard in the Chitwan area declined until late 2021 because of land fragmentation and conversion to banana farming and poultry. But since mustard prices have gone up so much, the demand for oil in South Asia has increased, so the farming of mustard has risen once again. Now, there's a proverb in many cultures around the world that may have different words, but the meaning is the same. between us, bread and salt. This particular version is a Palestinian proverb in this sign painted by the late artist Justin Green. It means basically that we can go a long way toward understanding one another and toward appreciating differences and arrive at similarities if we sit down and share a meal together. Bread and salt together mean something permanent and something essential. Even in something as simple as mustard, or any plant or food for that matter, can be better understood in its manifestations in different cultures if we take an ethnologic opportunity to let the stories reveal themselves. But then again, some things are just unexplainable. You notice the cap is still tightly on there. This was a gift from my son Josh, and someday I'll try it. So we look at mustard in our own culture and its common manifestation, such as mustard in nursery rhymes. By the late 1800s, mustard was popping up in nursery rhymes like Mother Goose and even clapping games like Mabel, Mabel set the table. In a limerick by Edward Lear, he said, "There was an old person of Florence who held mutton chops in abhorrence. He purchased a bustard and fried him in mustard, which choked that old person of Florence." And in the Little Mother Goose in 1912, we read, "When Jackie's a very good boy, he shall have cakes and custard. But when he does nothing but cry, he shall have nothing but mustard." And from 1899, cowardly custard eats his mother's mustard. In this context, custard refers to a timid or a fearful person, but it just doesn't put mustard in a very delectable light. Graham and Kellogg would be happy about it, though. And its celebration as well in mustard. This is the National Mustard Museum up in Middleton, Wisconsin, outside of Madison. And it celebrates mustard in medicine, cuisine, literature, business, and community. And if you apply yourself and study hard, you can also get a diploma from the Mustard Museum. It is to be frank. So I'll end with this little passage that shows what a beautiful plant that mustard really is. This is from the 1949 memoir by British writer Monica Baldwin. In her book, I Leap Over the Wall, which she subtitles Contrasts and Impressions After 28 Years in a Convent, Baldwin tells of her years as a cloistered nun in England and her leaving the order. After being secluded for nearly 3 decades, she writes of her travel by train through the English countryside. She said, "I suppose I'd been shut away for so long that I'd forgotten what mustard fields looked like, but they seemed to me one of the loveliest things I had seen since I came out. Sheet upon sheet of blazing yellow, halfway between sulfur and celandine, with hot golden sunshine pouring down upon them out of a dazzling June sky. It thrilled me like music." Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin. So we are ready for some questions from the audience.
I can't help you, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, sorry. Are there any questions here in the live audience? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, my name's Dave. I'm a freelance writer, and I've noticed I do gardening for my main topic, and I've noticed a big increase in the number of seed manufacturers asking for me to write about growing mustard plants. And so that it sort of goes along with what you were saying about the increase in cultivation. Have you noticed? And also, there's a lot of use of mustard leaves as a dark green as well, and which is culinary rather than just the mustard sauce. Have you seen anything from that?
I think in terms of the United States and people growing mustard, it's the mustard greens that they're using, because that's a small scale thing. In terms of mustard farming in Ohio, for instance, to the extent that it's profitable, it just doesn't happen. I mean, there are a couple of organic farmers growing mustard in the state. Information you get from the Ohio Department of Agriculture, but it's just not viable that way. But there are a number of small truck farms growing mustard greens. Look toward the apple. Okay. I'll get over a little bit too. Yeah. There. How's that? Is that good? All right.
I was actually curious, since you are a mustard expert, if you were to go and have us pick out one, what would be your favorite one that you would suggest people try?
I will only tell you my favorite. You know, I believe that people should eat what they want, even if it's ketchup. But my favorite is Mr. Mustard. And after that, probably Coleman's. I like a strong mustard, and I like the feel. When you eat a hot pepper, it goes to your tongue, but when you eat horseradish or mustard, it goes straight up the sinuses. And I kind of like having my sinuses cleared out. No. Yeah, but Mr. Mustard to me is the best. And I say that not just because my son-in-law works for his family's company that makes that, but I really do enjoy that. Yeah, great.
You showed about, what, 6 or 7 different varieties from Cincinnati? Is that an unusually large number of mustard products from a single city, or were other cities also that productive?
They were also that productive. Over time, Dayton, Toledo, Cleveland, Detroit, Chicago, were all producing mustards over about a 100-year period. As a matter of fact, I did find a couple of businesses in Cincinnati in the 19th century that advertised for mustard seed. So the implication was mustard was being grown here enough that they wanted it delivered to them. But as I said, you know, we had a couple of big spice companies in Cincinnati over time. And in the 19th and early 20th century, a company did not necessarily produce one product. They produced a lot of spices and condiments. So mustard was part of that.
We have a question from our Zoom audience. Said you mentioned early on that all species of mustard are edible. Mm-hmm. Do you mean all species of Brassica or all members of the mustard family?
I'm only talking about mustard.
Okay.
To me, kale isn't edible. But no, just mustard. Okay. Every mustard plant that you find. And sometimes it's only the young leaves that are edible, that they get too fibrous or I wouldn't say bland, but unflavorful as they get bigger. But a young leaf will have a nice, spicy, peppery, hot taste. And incidentally, as long as we're talking about favorite mustards, if you buy something called wasabi mustard or wasabi, you're not getting wasabi. You're getting horseradish that's dyed green. Okay? Because wasabi is a very rare mustard-related plant grown in Japan. And it's too expensive to find in any stores around here. So, okay.
Good question over here.
So is mustard gas mustard? And my second question is, what does the evidence show they're using mustard for medical reasons now?
Okay, you asked 2 questions. One, is mustard part of what we think of as mustard gas that was used as a poisonous gas in World War I? And secondly, the medical evidence for mustard now. First of all, mustard is not related to the mustard gas at all. The gas was called mustard gas because of the cloud, the yellowish cloud or greenish yellowish cloud that appeared when it was used. So there's no relationship between the plant and the deadly gas. Now, in terms of medical evidence for the use of mustard, I think that's something that's just grown over the centuries. If you use a mustard bath now or a mustard plaster, you're going to notice the difference. I found no evidence that it actually cures gout or, as I said, baldness or anything like that. But there is evidence that it can relieve back pain. It can relieve rheumatism because it draws heat out. But again, there is a danger there if you're not careful of leaving it on too long, leaving the mustard plaster on too long and it burning the skin. The evidence for other things like aiding in against heart disease or liver health or cancer. The jury's still out on that. There's still a lot of evidence. The ones who are promoting that thought are typically the mustard oil companies in South Asia. And they have some studies that were done, but I think there still needs to be a rigorous application of studies here in the United States to ascertain whether that's true or not. But we do know that mustard has those properties of vitamins A, C, and E, and that it is low in omega fats.
I think we had another question.
Yeah.
You mentioned garlic mustard being a very invasive plant. Has anybody found anything good to do with it? Like when you're saying when the leaves are younger, they're tender. Does anybody make anything from garlic mustard?
Oh yeah, you can eat garlic mustard, and there are still people who will go out and gather it at the sides of fields or in the woods, and it's fine to eat, but it's not commercially viable, and it spreads so quickly and so efficiently that it covers up normal ground cover.
Our whole backyard.
Yeah.
And if you ever got rid of it, it's like the rest of us in Cincinnati were trying to get rid of honeysuckle in our yards. And that's not going to happen in my lifetime.
So we have another question from the Zoom audience. First of all, thank you for a very interesting talk. This person, Jacob, said, I grew up in the Carolinas and my grandmother often served a dish called mustard greens. I always thought I was served a collard that didn't taste like mustard.
Well, I don't know that mustard greens taste like prepared mustard. I mean, it is two different tastes because they're prepared mustard. You're adding other spices, you're adding vinegar to it, you're adding salt. So mustard greens cooked up to go with whatever dish you're eating as well is a completely different animal.
And also Jacob asked, why was it decided to add turmeric or turmeric, depending on how you say that, to mustard? Yellow isn't a decidedly appetizing color. And I, in parentheses, again, a Southerner, noticed a bottle of Duke's mustard without the yellow color.
It's a matter of preference. They started using turmeric and mustard in the 19th century. And at the World's Fair in 1904, I think it was, when they were using it for hot dogs, and it attracted people. Some people like that color. Yeah. So it's a matter of personal taste, I think.
I once had a yellow kitchen, so
Yeah.
Yeah.
do we?
Any other questions?
I just want your opinion on this with the mustard soda. You think it would be better with gin or with vodka?
One or the other.
Which one before you come down?
Well, you know, in all honesty, if you're going to have something like that, you got to give it an honest taste first. And then once you realize what it tastes like, then you dilute it or add gin or vodka to it. Yeah.
I have a two-part question now. First being for the mustard plaster, is that literally just like a mustard powder that they mix with water? Or is there anything else that they would normally mix with that to make it more like that?
You have to make a paste essentially out of it. So you're adding water to powdered mustard, or, you know, as I showed in a couple of the slides, you can buy mustard plasters and add some water and apply them to the skin.
Second question or thought is, I know that turmeric and pepper have this kind of relationship that makes, you know, all the healing properties, you know, more bioavailable or whatever, right, for your body to take in. Is there anything between mustard and turmeric as well, or is it just a color thing?
Oh, no, I don't think it's just a color thing. I think there is a flavor there and there is a health benefit to adding to it. But if you ask French's or Heinz or Wilbur's or any others, they may be saying it's just traditional to add and create yellow mustard. But I don't know that you would pick up the taste of just mustard and turmeric because you've got so many other things being added.
An odd question, but okay, we buy the little yellow can, the Coleman's can of powdered mustard. We also buy mustard seed. So if I'm out of powdered mustard, can I grind up is that what mustard seed?
Definitely.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
You take a
I
mortar
never
and pestle.
thought about it.
Yeah, you grind the seeds up until you get it as fine as you want. Add a little vinegar or add beer or some sort of liquid, maybe a little salt, stir it up, and there you go. It's very, very simple.
And I could do that with the powdered also?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. As a matter of fact, sometimes you can buy from a spice store something labeled as Chinese mustard. It's actually Canadian brown mustard seed. But when you mix it up with a little water, it's that Chinese mustard you get with your egg roll or something like that. Very pungent, and it's good to use it, pretty close to the making of it so that it remains pungent.
So from our Zoom audience, Charles asked, we've heard about English, French, and American mustard. What about mustard in Germany? Did German mustard have any influence on Cincinnati mustard?
Well, we have in Cincinnati something called the Handelmeyer Mustard Club, which meets once a month at Mecklenburg's. And they wear yellow shirts and they celebrate Handelmeyer's mustard of Germany, which makes several different kinds. I'm not a fan of Bavarian sweet mustard, but other German mustards can be hot or they can be like a Dutch mustard where it's very smooth and mild.
So another question is, does mustard have to be refrigerated? We have an ongoing debate about this in our household, as some don't want to put cold condiment on hot food.
Okay. When you go to a store and you buy a jar of mustard and it says refrigerate after opening, you should refrigerate it after opening. If you're mixing up your mustard at home, you should refrigerate that too. Any product you make like that should go in the fridge. If you don't like it cold on something hot, bring it out and let it warm up to room temperature.
So we also have a question of the many claims for the use of mustard, which have survived as efficacious today.
That's a tough question, and it relates to hers too. There are a lot of claims about any herb or any spice or any sauce like that. And I think the jury's out on a lot of it. We do know what the properties of mustard are. And it's not something that can harm you, so go ahead and take it.
So also there seems to be a lot of fascination with the mustard plaster. And is the benefit due mainly to the irritation and the heat or the heat it generates?
It's not the irritation. If you leave it on too long, you've got the irritation. But it's not only the heat it generates, but it's the heat comfort to your body, the same as you got from Vicks Vapor Rub or Salon Plus patches that you put on now. It's the same principle.
And then Julie says, have you ever heard of using mustard to treat burns?
Yes.
When my husband burned himself, an embarrassing story, she says, I applied mustard everywhere he was burned. He experienced immediate relief and had no signs of burn the next day or two.
Well, I'll tell you, our neighbor across the street runs a beauty parlor, and she says that her employees keep a jar of mustard in the office for when they burn themselves. And a friend of mine, Andy Sweeney, was out on the golf course with a friend of his who either somehow burned himself, who knows how, had a little burn, and kept a jar of mustard in his golf bag and applied that and it helped. So yeah, supposedly that helps. I'm not sure, but a lot of times if you believe it, it'll do it.
Do we have any other questions from the audience?
I just have this just popped in my head. Where's the expression cut mustard come from?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. I don't think I can answer that in a
probably has a
reasonable way.
One, but I don't know.
I suspect that it has to do with your ability to withstand heat from food. That if you're able to cut the mustard, that you are brave, that you're able to get a task done.
Well, Kevin, I'd like to thank you for most informative and entertaining lecture tonight, and the questions that you had to field. You really had to be the encyclopedia of mustard.
Or you like it a lot.
Or you like it a lot. So I would like to give special thanks to the live audience and to the Zoom audience for joining us.